Hey everybody, welcome back to Pro Wrestling Musings, the podcast where we talk about wrestling, and then we talk about wrestling, and then we talk about even more wrestling, because that's pretty much what we would be doing anyway. Joining me today, I am GA Sports, and joining me is Anthony from Down Under, and of course, Sergi, both of whom write over on ProWrestlingMusings.com. Lots of stuff to talk about today. We're going to be mostly talking about AEW, but there was a story breaking as we're recording that we need to get to before we get to any of that, and I'm sure you guys have heard, Chris Jericho is coming to the Broken Skull Sessions, Stone Cold Steve Austin's podcast that is hosted on the WWE Network and Peacock, and this news, I guess you could say news kind of broke yesterday, but everyone just assumed it must have been an April Fool's thing, and it turns out it's not. You know, Chris Jericho is really showing up to Broken Skull Sessions. So I just kind of want to turn it over to you guys. We'll start with Anthony. What do you think the implications are here? I mean, is it possible that we're making too big of a deal out of this? Is this just kind of a one-time thing, or do you think this is really kind of changing something in the world of wrestling right now?
So I looked up at the Twitter trending and the comments and everything as I normally do, and had a quick look, and a lot of people are going. A lot of people are the same. They're all going, "Oh my God, this forbidden door has just been kicked wide open." But I think that this is just a once-off. I don't know how much of AEW they're actually going to talk about. I'm assuming that they're going to talk about some of it, but I think from what I can gather, I reckon it will be a look at his career, because that's what the podcast mainly is. It's talking about people's careers and where they've come from, what they've done. I've watched a few of them, including the Undertaker one, the Orton one, the Bailey one, all those ones. So, yeah, I think it's more about the career rather than what he's doing, but just having an AEW star on a WWE program is crazy. Like, you wouldn't think that was happening, but I think it's a harmless podcast. So as great and as huge as it seems to be, it's just a podcast. So I think we shouldn't get too far in front of ourselves. However, my favorite comment was that someone said if they started seeing TK buy ads on Raw and SmackDown like he does with Impact, they were going to pop. And I got to admit, that sounds pretty damn good.
I actually might watch Raw and SmackDown every week if TK was buying ads like that. Sergi, what do you think, my man?
I agree with Anthony. Absolutely, there are people who are possibly making a bit too much of it. I think that most people aren't really making too much of it so much as they are taking the obvious implications and just making jokes. Yeah. No one really thinks that there is going to be a full-on AEW WWE crossover. Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone thinks that. And I don't think that this is evidence that that's going to happen. I think it is evidence that there are people in WWE who aren't afraid to say, we can say those three letters. Mm-hmm. It's not that big a deal. Yes, there are competition, but there is no reason why someone like Chris Jericho can't go onto one of our podcasts, because that will cause controversy, and everybody remembers Eric Bischoff's mantra about controversy.
Right.
So, and I think that's the biggest part of it. The biggest aspect of it is this is all about, this is going to get people talking about Broken Skull Session in the way that nobody else is going to. Not just because Chris Jericho is a legend, but because he works for the other company.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I do think, I don't think that we're about to see Roman Reigns versus Kenny Omega winner take all, like we're seeing with Rich Swann and Kenny Omega. And I think you're right. I doubt anyone is really expecting that. But I do think it's worth saying that a lot has changed since the beginning of AEW. I mean, if we remember all the way back, those three letters in WWE were absolutely forbidden. I mean, you couldn't talk about them. You couldn't reference the fact that AEW existed. It was very antagonistic, where WWE was pretending that AEW didn't exist, and AEW was going out of their way to take multiple shots at WWE. I mean, obviously we all remember Cody destroying Triple H's throne, and that's just, one of the several shots that they took. And I remember when AEW and NXT first went on the same night. AEW whipped the hell out of NXT that night in the ratings, and WWE kind of put out this mealy-mouthed statement where they don't even really reference the fact that AEW exists and all this kind of stuff. Sami Zayn says AEW on a show, and it's like this big controversy. So to go from there in less than 2 years to the point where WWE's arguably their biggest star ever, or at least since Hulk Hogan, is hosting this podcast that is completely, it's in WWE. I mean, it's referenced on WWE programming. So this podcast exists to them. It's not just some project that Stone Cold does. It actually exists to WWE. And he's bringing on an AEW wrestler. I think it just shows how much things have changed in the last, 18 months to where now there's this recognition that we can't go on any longer just pretending that competition doesn't exist. And WWE is infamous for doing that. And they're saying, you know what? We can't do that anymore. That's not how it's going to work. So we're not going to get the antagonistic relationship that we saw during the Monday Night Wars, for example, where the companies obviously reference each other, but it's all in the idea is we're going to beat the other one. I think we're now moving into a different relationship, more similar to what we used to see even in the 70s, where companies, not so much territorial, but just in terms of companies knew each other existed and they'd reference each other, but the day-to-day operations are pretty separate, and I think that's pretty cool. I like it personally. I mean, I think it's a good change. I don't know what you guys think, if we want to see kind of more of a exclusivity type thing, but I think it's a good change for me.
I agree completely, and to build on that a little bit, it's different from the completely antagonistic relationship that they had in terms of when they would refer to WCW when they were an active competitor, but it's also very different from the complete pretending that they did not exist. If anybody came from over there, they'd say they were wrestling elsewhere. The relationship that they had with TNA when TNA was a little bit bigger than they are now.
Right. That's a great point. Let's go to AEW now and talk about this last week's episode of Dynamite. And normally we start out with talking about some of our stats that have been provided by Craig over on ProWrestlingMusings.com. But this time I want to tackle a different question first before we start getting into some of these statistics, because it's a question that's kind of been making the rounds on social media and something that a lot of different commentators and journalists and people like that have referenced and have asked. When it comes to factions in AEW, the question is, are there too many, and is the storytelling different enough so that it doesn't get boring? I think those two questions are kind of intertwined, and obviously with what we saw from Inner Circle and the Pinnacle on this last week's episode of Dynamite, which, by the way, I absolutely loved, for the record, when MJF opens that bathroom door and it's just Jericho and those guys standing in there. MJF is like, what is the stench in this bathroom? And it's just those guys standing right there. That was excellent. It's one of my favorite moments of Dynamite, honestly. But I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Anthony first. Do you think that there is too much faction storytelling going on? Do you think that it's varied enough to keep you interested?
Okay, so I wanted to go and have a look at something that I saw. So someone said, the only people who aren't in factions are Christian and what's his name? The Murderhawk Monster, Lance Archer, sorry.
Yep.
Forgot his name for a second. So I was like, okay, that doesn't sound really correct. So I'm going to go onto the AEW website and go through their official roster page on their website and see, what they've done there. So on their pages, they've got a lot of people with their names. So for an example, they've got Alan Ages and they've got Of Dark Order. So I was like, okay, cool. That's going to help me see who's in a faction, who's in a group and everything like that. Only to find out that it is incredibly out of date.
I noticed that as well.
They've still got MJF listed as Inner Circle. They've got Yeah, so unfortunately that wasn't as helpful as I'd like it to be. But when you look at it, you can think it makes sense to me, because why wouldn't you want to have some backup? Why wouldn't you want to have someone to work with? Why wouldn't you want to create bonds? Where us as people are very community oriented, so why wouldn't you want to do that? It makes sense where you're like, okay, if you think of it as a football league or something like that, these factions are pretty much your team that you're playing with and playing for. So it makes sense to me. I do think when you put the question, do enough of the factions have enough, I guess, space to be their own thing? That I think is debatable, and it will be very interesting to see what happens with the Pinnacle and Inner Circle. Sorry, and whether or not Inner Circle do go full babyface, which I'm not sure if they're going to be able to go full babyface, but I'm going to enjoy the journey to see what happens. But if they don't go full babyface, then are you going to be able to have the Pinnacle, who are being billed as kind of the top heel faction, versus and are you going to have a kind of heel Inner Circle doing very much a similar thing at the same time? And I think that's in the early days when you had the Nightmare faction with Brandy, and then you had
we don't talk about that around here. We don't talk about the Nightmare family around here.
You had the Dark Order, and then you had the Nightmare Collective with Brandy Rhodes, and they're both doing the exact same thing week after week, and it pushed both groups back, because you're like, well, you're going and getting members, into some sort of cult-like thing. You can't really tell them apart. So yes, I'm all for factions, but you do have to try and make them seem different or have a reason for them being there. I think obviously some of them you do lose a little bit of sense. I'm as much as I'm loving Matt Hardy's character at the moment, Big Money Matt, I'm not a fan of the faction that he's formed, because I don't think that it works very well. And I haven't really been given a reason that it all works together. Like, I know Blade and Butcher and Bunny do, they started off as basically hired money, but then you've sort of seen a bit of a character arc where they've joined a family. So, now to go back to being assassins, I don't know. It doesn't, for me personally, it doesn't feel right. I'm all for factions. But they've got to make sense. They've got to be different, and you've got to be able to say, okay, this is a group here, and this person belongs to this faction. And also, factions are great because they allow multiple people to get TV time or get time when they wouldn't normally.
Right. I think the question that I want to turn over to Sergi now is, when you talk about that variety, or at least in the beginning of AEW, kind of the lack thereof, I think that over the last 10 to 15, really 20 years, we've kind of been trained to view factions as something very specific, because WWE, which has been, for us American, and obviously Anthony is from Australia, but I know Anthony doesn't watch a lot of New Japan, so for anyone who watches Western wrestling, WWE treats factions very specifically. If they are allowed, then the story is they form, they dominate, and they break up. And that's the story for every single one. And that's the only way the factions have been treated in major Western wrestling for about 20 years now. So I think we as fans have become so conditioned to believe that is the raison d'etre, if you will, of all factions, that when AEW forms like 5 of them, we're all sitting here thinking, how could they possibly each dominate AEW? There's only 3 championships, or 4 championships now. How is that possible? But I think AEW is going more towards this idea, exactly what Anthony said, that factions are about teamwork, they're about having backup, they're about being able to have this group that kind of rolls together, but they don't have to dominate AEW. Dark Order is really, really over. and they don't do anything. Like, they don't dominate AEW, they don't win championships, they don't do any of that stuff, and they are really over. And so the question that I want to pose to Sergi is, if a year from now we're still looking at Dark Order existing, the Pinnacle still exists, maybe the Inner Circle exists in some form, with Jericho as like the J.J. Dillon kind of, like he doesn't wrestle but he's the mouthpiece, that kind of thing. If we're looking at that in a year's time, do you think AEW is doing a good enough job to make you think that these factions can exist for a long time and still be interesting?
That's a really good question. I think that the factions, it depends on the faction. In the case of Dark Order is a perfect example of a faction that does not exist for the purpose of dominating. They said from the start that they existed for the purpose of self-improvement. Mm-hmm. Now, we didn't take that literally, because the way they came across was that they were just saying that, but really they were going to use the people that they drew in.
Right.
And then as they turned babyface, they just, it was like, well, everything that we said originally, we're just going to take that at face value now, that this is all about friendship and community and building each other up. And they don't have to dominate anything. But the Inner Circle and the Pinnacle, one has to lose and be destroyed. Period. The Inner Circle is here to get their revenge, try to get their revenge and get some revenge, and then fail and fall apart. That's what they're here for.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, does it make sense for the Inner Circle to defeat Pinnacle? As storytelling. Not really.
At this point, I'm thinking probably not, honestly.
Yeah, because Pinnacle is new. The Inner Circle has already dominated and held championships.
Yeah.
The Pinnacle needs to dominate and hold championships. And MJF has talked about getting gold, but he hasn't made any moves to get gold. And there's a reason for that I've brought up whenever asked about it, which is he does not want to start a two-front war. Who holds championships now? Groups that you don't want to deal with while also having to deal with the Inner Circle. He does not want a two-front war.
Well,
he has been waiting for the counterattack, and he's going to deal with Inner Circle first. But then they need gold. I like my own words a lot sometimes, and one of them from the roundtable that we did a week or two ago was that that gold is the gravity that holds all those egos together that would otherwise repel one another.
Yeah.
Without gold, that group has no reason to exist.
You're talking about the Pinnacle.
I'm referring to the Pinnacle, yes.
I think that's a fantastic way of looking at it. And I do think that from the Pinnacle's perspective, it seems to be pretty obvious early on that the Pinnacle exists solely to get championship gold. And MJF has pretty much said that from the beginning. And there is no, it's different from the Inner Circle. The Inner Circle, the Inner Circle formed under similar circumstances where Jericho was the world champion, and the idea was we're going to make sure that Jericho holds the world championship and no one can get close to him. So it kind of formed with the same auspices, but it quickly developed into Jericho becoming very loyal to the people within Inner Circle, and there started to become this connection between all of the members of Inner Circle. And if you remember, in the early days of the pandemic, the Inner Circle would do these kinds of all these vignettes and these segments on Dynamite where they had like the Flim Flam challenge and they had all this kind of stuff. You had Jericho cutting a promo on Matt Hardy's drone that he sent to his house. All this funny stuff that the Inner Circle did that kind of made you more connected emotionally. The Pinnacle, it seems to be going in another direction where they're saying, we don't care if you're connected emotionally to any of our people. The point is that we are going to dominate. But, to your point, Sergi, what you end up with is MJF saying, I don't want to deal with Bullet Club while I'm having to deal with the Inner Circle. And that's one more piece of that very subtle storytelling that AEW is very, very good at. And I think this Pinnacle Inner Circle war is something I'm really interested in. The Dark Order, for me, can kind of be around in perpetuity just because they became baby faces after the passing of Brody Lee, and they're all very lovable. John Silver especially has become so over the last few months. So I'm okay with Dark Order existing however long they need to, just because, you know, they're a group. They're a group of friends. That's the whole idea. I think the Hardy family office has kind of taken over the recruiting deal that Dark Order was doing under Brody Lee, where the whole idea of the Hardy family office is Matt Hardy's just going to try to buy people. And that is a good storyline. I think there's a shelf-life on it, but, you know, for now, I don't have as much of an issue with it as Anthony does. Not to say that there's anything wrong with having an issue with it. I'm just saying there's kind of two different ways to look at it. Now, there is one maybe new faction that formed, possibly, on Dynamite that I really want to talk about. And this is the QT Marshall turn on Cody Rhodes. Now, we can talk, and we have in the past, about what we think about Cody Rhodes and how he's presented and all this kind of stuff. However, what happened on this episode of Dynamite, for me, was some of the most compelling and interesting storytelling that I have ever seen, and it clicked with me immediately, because everything in the instant that QT Marshall laid out Arn Anderson, it clicked, because I'm like, yes, of course QT Marshall would hate Cody Rhodes for what he's been doing. Yes, he would start harboring a grudge against the entire Nightmare family, because and I'm thinking back now, from the very beginning of Dynamite, QT Marshall has been referred to as one of the head trainers in the Nightmare Factory. When they started bringing in people to use on Dark, they kept saying, these are QT Marshall's students. These are people that QT Marshall trained. And so QT Marshall is sitting here saying, I've trained the future of AEW. Almost everyone has come through me, and I've taught them how to be professional wrestlers. And yet, here I am being disrespected week after week. And so he snaps in a very believable way. And not only that, but some of his students snap with him, because his students are not loyal to the Nightmare Factory. His students are loyal to QT Marshall, the man who taught them how to wrestle. Everything about this turn worked perfectly for me. I think this was as good a faction formation as you could ever have, if it is indeed a faction. And one thing I want to talk specifically, and you guys can both talk more generally about this if you want to, but one thing that I want to say is when it comes to Anthony Ogogo, the former Olympic boxer, who I've been a fan of for years because I love boxing. So I was really excited when I found out that he was coming to AEW. You want to talk about how to build a killer in like 10 seconds. Anthony Ogogo rolls his sleeves down, takes one left hook, punches Cody, and Cody acts like he's been shot. That is how you build a killer. And I'm saying this, WWE has been trying for years to get Baron Corbin over with this, you know, oh, he's a former Golden Gloves boxer and whatever. But they can't do it, because there's nothing about him that says, oh, Baron Corbin, I must be really afraid of him because he's this Golden Gloves boxer. But Anthony Ogogo, they just say, here's an Olympic boxer. Here he is, like, breaking Cody in half with one punch. That is how you make a killer. And so we went from me not caring at all about anything that has to do with the Nightmare family to suddenly this group of QT Marshall and Aaron Solo and Nick Camarado and Anthony Ogogo. Suddenly I care a lot about this whole storyline, and that is a credit to AEW's long-term storytelling. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys now after I've talked enough. What do you guys think about this particular faction as it relates to the rest of faction storytelling in AEW?
Well, I have to admit, when I read How to Build a Monster in 10 Seconds on our run sheet, I had to watch the segment again because I thought you meant Nick Camarado.
Oh, really?
Because I was just like, oh yeah, he punched Cody. That was pretty good. But Camarado was that the Razor's Edge? Some sort of a toss of Lee Johnson over the top rope onto that ramp, and then also the big deadlift of the steel steps. I was definitely A lot more taken by how they built up Camarado as a monster. But
wow, that's really
I do
interesting.
see where you're coming from with Mr. Ogogo. He's an Olympic boxer. It sounds like they're building up his punches to be deadly, and that is something that's very difficult in professional wrestling. And I completely understand how, with someone who's a Golden Gloves boxer or an Olympic boxer, whatever, it's like, well, how do we say this guy's punches are deadly? Nobody's punches are really deadly in professional wrestling. People come back from punches all the time. It takes lots of them to have any effect.
Right.
So it's a difficult thing to work with in terms of putting together a match with someone who's, you're told that his punch is supposed to be sold at such a higher level than most people's punches. We'll see how that works once we see him in a match.
That's a good point. Anthony, what did you think about this whole QT Marshall turn?
I'm glad that you both enjoyed it. I was on the complete opposite stage. I did not like it. It definitely did not. I thought that it might have just been me, because a lot of people that I did talk to, a few of you guys, a few other people, and from what I saw on Twitter, were all like, "Oh no, it was really good." So I actually went and rewatched it today as well, and still, I don't know why. It's just, I think for me, because in the match it just seemed like Cody was just toying with QT.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, okay, cool, he snapped, but why am I now going to get invested in QT when he was just basically being toyed with? I get the idea of the story that they're going for, but for me, this is very much a story that is for those people who watch Dark, watch Elevation, and have seen all this background stuff. But if you just go by Dynamite, if you just watch Dynamite, I don't think that they did enough to really put this story over. There was a few comments on commentary, but in total, I don't think that they did enough to sort of say, this is why this is happening. It just, for me, it didn't really feel very good. And when we're looking at it, we're like, okay, cool, it's a new faction, but where are they going to go? So I've talked to a few people. A few people have said that, probably be a lower card heel group. And you've got people like, I also thought that you're talking about Nick as well, because oh boy, he has star written all over him. From the moment that I saw him wrestle, John Moxley, I was like, oh boy, he's good to go. I'm really actually upset he's not with Jurassic Express, because that would have been cool. There was something that I found on Twitter. So like most of my writing and that comes from social media stuff, so I'm all over that. But I thought that this was really, really interesting. So over a year ago, Jake Roberts debuted, and he called Cody Rhodes Caesar. Fast forward to now, Cody Rhodes is stabbed in the back by his best friend in front of his peers during the month of March, while his people revolted against him for being too grounded and self-serving.
Wow.
I know it's not on the Isles of March, but I thought that's like, I know that's not an actual thing, but I was just like, wow, that's actually really cool when like people can look at that in depth, like those sort of things are in there, and I think that that's really interesting. But yeah, for me personally, I just didn't really, I guess, feel the turn, because I haven't watched Dark and that in a couple of weeks, because I just literally have not had time. But yeah, I liked what I saw. Like it was good, but for me, the story, I don't know where they're going with it. I don't know how high it's going to go, and I just feel I don't know. It just did not hit it for me.
As our friend Gareth would say regarding the Ides of March, long-term storytelling.
Look, I actually wouldn't put it past them if that was kind of in their minds. That, obviously the Jake Roberts promo on Cody, the Caesar line and everything like that, it's one of the most recognizable promos so far in AEW, I think. because that happened over a year ago, and I still remember almost all of it, and I remember several quotes from it. So I wouldn't be surprised if that did kind of enter their minds. But Anthony, I do think you make actually a really good point, and this is criticism that we've heard of AEW from kind of the very beginning, or at least ever since Dark became a thing, is that a lot of people are saying there's too much storytelling going on outside of Dynamite, and so when they reference things in Dynamite, sometimes I don't get the reference. And I think at the beginning of AEW, that was an issue. They actually were referencing very important things that you wouldn't necessarily get. I think now they've moved to some of those references that we've talked about before, where it just enhances your viewing experience. Like if you happen to watch Dark, then AEW makes a reference and you get it and you're like, oh yeah, I know the thing. But I do think you make a good point here. If you are not familiar with these people, if you're not familiar with QT Marshall's role in the Nightmare Factory, and you're not familiar with Anthony Ogogo, and any of this kind of stuff, because Nick Camarado's had a match on Dynamite, and as you said, I thought it was a star-making performance for him as well against Moxley, but Anthony Ogogo has not. He's been on commentary a few times, but he's never had a match. So if you didn't know anything about any of these people, then this turn, I see where you're coming from. It kind of would be a little bit out of nowhere for you. So I think this is kind of a beauty is in the eye of the beholder kind of thing. And if it didn't work for you, then I totally understand. But now is the time to see if QT and these other guys can make you care, even if you didn't care necessarily about the turn. I mean, I know that you in particular, Anthony, you're a very open-minded person. So I know that if they do enough to make you care, then you will. And so I think that's going to be the challenge going forward for this group, and we'll see kind of, how much prominence they have, and we'll see, where on the card they kind of fit in. I think probably lower on the card would be my guess, just because a lot of these guys are young and a lot of them are inexperienced. But I do think it's cool that the story seems to be essentially about young wrestlers, rookie wrestlers, breaking in and finding their careers. I mean, it seems like they're kind of going with, the idea that Cody has held them down, the Nightmare Family's held them down, or whatever the case may be. That kind of seems to be leading in the direction that they're going with. Just based on QT's promos. So that I think is really cool, because this is AEW saying flat out, we know that we have stars for the future, but now it's time for us to turn them into stars now. And that for a wrestling company has always been that has always been an imperative, and very few wrestling companies have gotten it right for any extended period of time. So before we move on, I want to ask one more quick question about this, because we seem to have different views on who the breakout might be. I've said that I think the breakout star from this, if I were to just guess today, I think Anthony Ogogo will be the biggest star to come out of this. But again, I'm a little biased because I knew him from when he was boxing before I even started watching wrestling. So it's a familiar name to me, and I know kind of what he's about. But you guys think that it's Camarado. So I'll start with Anthony. What about Camarado makes you think this guy's going to be the breakout performer here?
I think the spot with the steps was the big one for me. Normally when you see the step spot, so when we saw the Drew versus Sheamus match on Raw a few weeks ago, they actually both picked up steel steps and sort of ran each other and slammed the steps into each other, and they made it look effortless. They made the steps feel like they didn't weigh anything. But for me, just him actually looking like, yep, they actually are heavy, and you could see that they looked heavy, so it made it look more impressive. And for me, that's something that's, very character driven, that he put in that little bit of extra work to make people believe that, yes, these are heavy and I'm lifting them. So that puts me over even more. And I think that's something that is very natural. And I think that's why I think he looks the best, and also that throwing spot was great. I'll agree with Sergi there that I think that was a really good spot. But yeah, I think it's the look of him, it's how he acts, and it's just those small little details that does it for me.
That is such a phenomenal observation, and I want to add one quick thing to that as well to kind of put that over the top, was Excalibur saying those stairs weigh 500 pounds. That is a number that is not so heavy that you'd be like, nobody can lift it, but it's like when you see Nick Camarado, you see the size of him, and then you see him struggling to lift him up, and then Excalibur says those weigh 500 pounds. I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. They probably weigh about 500 pounds because you have this massive guy who's struggling to get him up, but he gets him up eventually. So I think I never really thought about that spot in that way, but I think you're absolutely right that spot really made Nick Camarado, and I'm glad you pointed that out. Sergi, do you have anything to add on the potential breakout star of this group?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's interesting that I'm thinking about them in the context of being in a stable together. And like you said, at this point, probably it's going to be a stable that's going to be on Dark a lot and not be like dominant. Mm-hmm. But a year from now, that may change. At a point where they're really dominant with that group of people, you're looking at something that looks a lot like Evolution, in the sense that Agogo has a lot of the same pluses and minuses, not quite, a little bit more relatable, I'd say, than Orton, but a lot of the same athletic pluses and minuses as an Orton, where Batista is more like Camarado. Mm-hmm. And as to which of them is going to be a breakout star, I think it really all comes down to personality. Camarado, I think, is very engaging and is able to speak in a way that people can relate to him, which is something Orton has always struggled with. And he has that great accent, and is just really good on the mic, which we've already seen if you've watched Dark enough to catch when he's done color commentary.
Right.
So that's going to be a big plus for him. And like I said, he's still an unknown in the ring. In the ring, we haven't seen him. He hopefully should be great. But like I said earlier, there's the whole question of how can you work in that power of the punch into an average match.
Right.
On the flip side, you've got Camarado, who we have seen in matches, looks fantastic, has that power and strength on his side, does these great spots and does them very well.
Yeah.
But we haven't heard him speak. No idea if he's any good on the mic. It was when Batista started showing personality that people went, oh, he's not just the dumb muscle. He's somebody. Yeah,
right. I think it's an apt comparison, at least when it comes to those two guys. And I think if we're going to take that comparison even further, when you talk about who is the breakout star of Evolution, basically both of them, but in two very, very different ways. So Randy Orton is a breakout star just in terms of professional wrestling, where he is now, I've said, probably the most recognizable professional wrestler that didn't do, mainstream movies and all that kind of stuff. He just wrestles, and yet everyone knows who he is. And Batista, meanwhile, is a huge deal in Hollywood, and he's in major, major blockbuster movies. And he's now, as an actor, becoming one of the biggest actors in America, maybe all over the world. So there's kind of two different ways that you can become breakout stars. And in this case, I could almost see that being flipped. I could see Anthony Ogogo being the more crossover appeal. As you said, he's got the look, he's got the voice, he's got the accent, he's got everything. And he's already done pop culture stuff. He was on, I believe he was on England's equivalent of Dancing with the Stars a few years ago. So he kind of has that Batista level of breakout appeal, whereas I could see Nick Camarado being a very recognizable professional wrestler, but not doing movies and TV and all that kind of stuff, but still being recognizable. I mean, I could absolutely see that being the case going forward.
Yeah, I think, but the one thing about Camarado is he hasn't had the opportunity yet. We really have no idea what he's like on the mic or in terms of any kind of a backstage sketch, that kind of thing. Yeah. He's good at physically acting out what, looking believable when he's moving a heavy object, just like Anthony was talking about.
Right.
So he's got that going for him to start with. But yeah, it remains to be seen. He's definitely an unknown factor when it comes to can this guy talk? Because if he can, wow.
Yeah, well, that's very true. If he does come onto the mic and he blows people away, then you're just like, oh my God, where did this guy come from? And maybe he will. Maybe it'll be like an Orange Cassidy thing where they wait and they kind of build it up, and then finally when he gets on the mic and speaks, it's kind of this big moment. So I'm excited to see where this goes. Speaking of promos, the best one of the night for me was Jon Moxley's before his match with Cesar Bononi, and it was highlighted by Moxley putting over Bononi and saying, this guy's going to be a star, but not if I kill him tonight on Dynamite. That was such a great line, such a Moxley line. I absolutely loved that. So I want to start with this match when we talk about some of the standout statistics that we saw from tonight's Dynamite. And, of course, you can follow along with us over on ProWrestlingMusings.com. When it comes to Mox versus Bononi, what stood out to me was Moxley gave Bononi a lot in this match. He really made Bononi look like a freak of nature, and I think that's big. I don't know, I don't know what Bononi's future is going to be. I don't know if his partnership with Ryan Nemeth and JD Drake is going to continue or what the deal with that is going to be. But in this match, he looked like a killer, and I think that's exactly what Moxley was intending to do, and it's exactly what he did with Nick Comoroto a couple months ago, like we were just talking about. He made Comoroto look like a killer. I'll start with Sergi this time. What did you think of this match? And when you look at the statistics, what jumps out to you?
Well, you point out the Nick Comoroto match and this match and the similarities. And it's like, well, you might think that Jon Moxley is someone that they look to as being good at putting over a big guy. And yeah, it is something he's really good at, despite the fact that, well, no, actually not despite, actually because of the fact that he is, in general, a really dominant wrestler. If you look at his stats over the course of time, in most matches, he is incredibly dominant. He goes in, he kicks butt, and he doesn't, he's not, like a Kenny Omega or Christian, generally speaking, are not going to dominate from bell to bell. That's not what they do. Yeah. They're standing, they're waiting to bring me what you've got. Let's see it. Let me take some punishment and wear you out. Wear your muscles out a little bit on me, and then I'll take over.
Yeah.
Whereas Moxley doesn't always do that. And when that makes it so that when he does, usually against someone who's much bigger, it makes it more special. It makes it like, oh, this guy's really strong because he's able to, push Jon Moxley around, and not everybody can do that.
That's a really good point. I do think what really helped as well, Jon Moxley is known. I mean, we know about Moxley that he is very strong for his size, and he is really tough. And so when he bears down and needs to get back into a match, what he usually does is he'll start unleashing some big strikes. And that goes back to his history as a wrestler. And so it means that in about 4 hours of in-ring competition, Moxley averages about an 11% strike down percentage, meaning that just about 1 out of every 8 strikes that he throws, or 1 out of every 10 that he throws, is going to knock you down. Against Bononi, he didn't score a single strike down the entire match. And when you're trying to build a giant, that's what that looks like. A guy that even Jon Moxley couldn't knock down. And again, do you know that while you're watching the match? Are you thinking, oh, he doesn't have a strike down yet? No, but what you get when you look back at an 8-minute match is to say Bononi never went down. Moxley could never knock him down, and that's just something that in the back of your mind, when we see Bononi again, you realize this is the guy that even Jon Moxley couldn't knock down.
Yeah, it's just like you're saying, maybe not consciously. You may not consciously be aware that that's the thing that happened in that match, but subconsciously it affects you and your perception of both wrestlers and their relative everything.
Yeah.
But I think that Moxley's selling and Moxley's putting over of Bononi was not the only noteworthy thing. Did a great job of that. But Bononi did a fantastic job of putting over just how tough Moxley is, or of putting over Moxley's submission at the end.
That's
He
right.
looked like he was about to die.
That's,
It was amazing.
You're absolutely right.
It was a work of art, I thought.
His sell on that rear naked choke. By the way, the way to get him into that move where he went for the pump handle slam, which, by the way, that the pump handle power slam, I absolutely love that. I wish that more guys would do that because I think it looks awesome. But then Moxley transitioning that into the rear naked choke, and Bononi, I mean, it looks like someone has just put like a tarantula on his face. Like he just is terrified that suddenly Moxley has locked in this thing. I absolutely agree with you. That was a great sell of that. Anthony,
he looked terrified, like, oh my God, am I gonna die? I think I'm dying.
Yeah, exactly. Like this guy's actually gonna choke me out. I think that was great. Anthony, if you got anything to add on this match, then please do. Otherwise, I want to know from you, looking at the stats from all the matches on Dynamite, that of course you can follow along with over on ProWrestlingMusings.com. And thank you to Craig for doing such a great job putting these together. What stands out to you from the whole show? What do you really think is noteworthy that we've seen?
Yeah, look, I've got, I think, two things to say about the Moxley Bononi match. First
Please
one
do.
is that I think that was a good match, and I think that it definitely put Bononi on over strong, and that I hope that they keep using that. Also, with Bononi's the faction that they've got, it's actually with Pretty Peter Avalon is in there as well, but I don't know where he is. He might be out injured, all that. But JD Drake, who is in that faction, is actually facing Darby Allin next week for the TNT title.
Yeah, right.
That will be an interesting one. I've seen some of his work on Dark, and he's quite a him and Eddie went to town on each other. So I think that's going to be a very interesting match to see and see what happens. But it's good that this group is being elevated like that. So I think that they're going to stick around for a little bit.
Okay.
For me, the match I think I want to talk about is obviously I think the match of the night personally, the Arcade Anarchy.
That's actually, when you said match of the night, that's not even where I went with that. So
what was your match of the night?
I thought when you said match of the night, you were going to go Lucha Bros and Laredo Kid versus Bullet Club.
It's so easy to just not be able to pick between the two because
I totally agree.
So much fun and so fast paced.
I totally agree. Arcade Anarchy was fantastic as well.
Yeah, I think for me, yes, the six-man was the best technical wrestling match, definitely by far. But for me, the match, the Anarchy, the arcade match was just wholesome fun, and because I went into that thinking, oh man, this is not going to be very good, and it was great. So I think no one was expecting it to be as good as it was. So I think that's why it gets a few extra points for me. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. I think Miro came off looking great, even though they did get the loss, which I knew that they were going to get. My issue with that was that Chuck Taylor tried to say, "Oh, if you accept this match, I'm going to be your butler forever." So as soon as that sort of caveat came in, I was like, okay, well, they're definitely going to lose. But they did enough with the storytelling to be like, no, this is Kip. Kip is the one who accepted this because he's still angry that they ruined his the wedding. They also had the return of our favorite alien, Chris Statlander. They also had also had the other what's his name? The other best friend,
Trent.
Trent. Yep, thank you, Sergi. They also had Trent return as well. So it was and the hug of all of them at the end while the music was playing, and Sue's mum. I popped for Sue. Sorry, she's great. I love seeing her in the van. It was just a really fun time for me, and I think just ending that way was just wholesome fun, and that's why I was like, hey, yeah, for me that's the match of the night. And just looking at the stats and everything, it's just a very interesting look at how many pins there were, the weapon attacks, everything. It was all very much on the side of Best Friends group, except for the grapples, and the reversals, which was all pretty much Miro. But I listened to Miro talk about it on his Twitch and YouTube, and he's like, he was in character at the time, and he's like, I was fighting basically he said 5 guys because he counted Sue in the 5, and he's like, I was fighting 5 people at once. Like,
why not?
On my own, what can I do? So, and this shows it. So yeah, I felt really good about this, and seeing Miro take another step in a different direction is definitely needed now that he's been built up as a monster.
Yeah, I agree. I do think this one is done. What I really loved about this match was the fact that it had all the hallmarks of what we know as a hardcore match in AEW, and it's actually for me it was actually pretty similar to the unsanctioned match a few weeks ago, just in terms of what the statistics actually look like, and how these wrestlers approach doing this match. But as we know, the unsanctioned match was very bloody and it was very violent, to the point where I'm a little surprised that they even got it on TV, because it's like it was. I'm pleasantly surprised. That match was excellent, but it was very violent, and this was like it was that, but with all of the violence kind of stripped out a little bit. Like, they didn't have the thumbtacks, they had the Legos, right? So there was no blood, but you still got that spot of someone being powerbombed onto something. You know what I mean?
It was the PG-13 version.
Exactly.
Just to clarify, you're referring to you're comparing it to the Rosa versus Britt Baker match, correct?
Yes. Thank you for clarifying. But I think, Anthony, you made a fantastic point. That's what I loved about it. Like, it was a wholesome hardcore match. And I never thought I'd ever say that.
I think one of the really interesting things about that match that Craig actually pointed out on Twitter is something that the stats don't capture so much. We don't have quite as much detail as I would like on tag team matches of who's in, who's out, especially in a match where there's no tags, and it's not a matter of tagging in and out, but a matter of, has someone been knocked off the side and is presumed incapacitated for a certain amount of time? Are people getting the opportunity to double team? And Craig pointed out that that is something that was happening through most of the match. That for a good section of the match, Miro was alone and Sabian was incapacitated, and then there was a section of the match where Miro was incapacitated and Sabian was alone. And I think that there are definitely people with old school mindsets who would look at that and say, "How is this making the good guys look good? They're ganging up on them. Why am I not rooting for the heel?" And it's just like, well, look at Miro. Right. It's just one of those cases of that's a one-man army. It's okay to gang up on him. Yeah. And Sabian being alone was because they had tried to, because they had eliminated Miro and ganged up on him enough to keep him eliminated for a while.
Yeah, and I do think that there was. Yeah. I do think that there was attempts to still have the baby faces, kind of have to come from behind. You had Penelope Ford's involvement, and then you had obviously her booting Orange Cassidy, which allowed, I think that was the spot which ended up allowing Chuck to be dumped into the Legos, to be powerbombed on top of the Legos. And that obviously facilitated the return of Chris Statlander, which I'm very happy about. I'm a huge fan of Chris Statlander. I think she's excellent. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think if you are analyzing this from just a pure old school perspective, then yeah, you'd say the baby faces got too much. The baby faces were on top all match. They were working 2-on-1. I understand all that. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. But what I would counter is to say that that's not what this match was for. That this match was the blow off to a story that has been a lot of comedy, and it has been really, I think it's kind of AEW recognizing that they're saying, you know what, Miro's a monster, so we need to start treating him like that. So let's just get out of this story and let's deliver you a match that you're going to remember, that you had a lot of fun watching. And that, to me, is what characterized this. I had fun watching this match. It was a great, fun match. I didn't think about, or the heels getting the heat or the baby faces making the comeback. I didn't care about that because it was a fun match, and I enjoyed watching it, and I think that's what they set out to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it's one of those cases where, going into it, you knew that Chuck Taylor or Kip Sabian are the only people eating pins in this match.
Right.
Miro was never going to eat a pin regardless.
Yep.
But the thing is that everything about the way it was designed, that even though Miro's team did not come out on top, nobody would come away with that as that it made Miro look weak. It did not at all. He still looks like a one-man army, and he genuinely. I mean, you've got Camarado, you've got big guys in this company, but there's nobody who's just instantly terrifying when he just moves, and the way that he, the physical nature that he has and expresses is just instantly like, geez, you wouldn't want to meet that in a dark alley.
Right.
Nothing compares to Miro on that level.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. When we're talking old school matches, we go from, this, which was not an old school style match at all, to the opener of the show, which I thought was a pretty old school style match, and that is Christian Cage versus Kazarian. This match, I think, I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it. And there has been some criticism that it was pretty slow. They got 16 minutes, and the first 8 of them were pretty slow, very grappling heavy, all that kind of stuff, and there was no commercial break either, so they just let them go for full 16 minutes to just have them. And I understand if that's kind of not your cup of tea, but for me, I actually really like this match. I think Christian, his whole catchphrase is outwork everyone, which is a great catchphrase, by the way. I really like it. And to me, this match, especially when you look at the offense totals chart over on ProWrestlingMusings.com, if you look at that, then you will see that Christian is dominating, or not dominating, but at the very least has the advantage for the first 5 to 10 minutes of the match. And then he starts to get tired. Frankie Kazarian gets the heat, Kazarian takes over, and Christian now has to battle from behind. And so what I really like about this is the fact that Christian was outworking Kazarian, and then he got tired. And so to me, they may very well be going with a story of, Christian is one of the best workers that we've seen in the last 20 years, but he's too old now, and he can't hang with younger guys. And Kazarian is not like he's that much younger than Christian. So what happens if you get Christian into a match with, with a much younger up and coming wrestler? This is a story that I'm okay with seeing, because it's different than anything that we've seen from the other veterans that have come back to join AEW. So I want to turn it over to you guys now. What did you think of this match?
Pick one. Oh, go ahead, Anthony.
That's all right. For me, I think it was. I've always loved Christian. Huge fan of him and his work, and he doesn't get the recognition that he deserves. So, for me, seeing him in the ring after 7 years was just great. And this is. I think people tend to forget. This is very much him and his match where he is more into the grappling, he is more into the slow pace, and then sort of speed things up towards the end. So for me, I think this is more, maybe this match is in the wrong position. Maybe we should have started off with, because Dynamite normally starts off with a pretty high impact or high paced match, and I think that's why people are saying, the start was slow, because we are now built to go, Dynamite's going to start off hot. Dynamite's going to start off fast. Okay, it's going to get us right in the mood. That might be, I don't know.
Do you think people would view this match, would they view it better? Would there be less criticism if they had switched its position on the card with, say, the 6-man tag, the Lucha Brothers and Laredo Kid versus Bullet Club?
Potentially, maybe. I obviously don't know, because I don't know that much, but I have seen a few people online say that they did feel that it might have been in the wrong spot. And for me, we come in every week and we watch it, and your first match of the night is normally a faster paced match. So I think that might have affected it. It might not have. I don't know what people think. But for me, I enjoyed the match. I was surprised to see the stats, obviously, that Kazarian got more strikes, got more I guess, offense there than I thought that he did while watching the match. But it was a really good match. Kazarian was definitely the right person to have with Christian. It showed that Christian can still wrestle. And I know that he'll critique that match himself and go back and he'll get better and it'll come off better But I was surprised to see that they got the whole 16 minutes with no ad. That was definitely a surprise. But considering it was Christian's first match, it's also not a surprise because, he's been gone 7 years. They made a huge deal of him coming over, and this is his first match. So, of course, they're going to give him the time, and they're going to give him the no ad break.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the match. The last part, the pin attempts and everything was really good. The finish was also good, and I think the little bits was that towards the end you could see that Christian, when he went and put in his finisher, he sort of stopped for a second and took a deep breath as if he was going like, I hope this works. This has to work. And I think that's, there's a lot more subtle storytelling in the facials in this match. And I think that's something that is just overlooked because we're not used to watching people's faces that much. And I think that's, something that Christian does a lot.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right about that because I wasn't watching his face when that happened. So that makes your point. Absolutely. Sergi, what did you think of this match?
I completely agree with the part Anthony was saying about the little things that Christian brings. He brings this little character bits that help to put over exactly who he is. Right now, he is someone who is incredibly grateful to be back to his career, and I think that's a story hook. I mean, it's a real life thing too. It's not just what his character is doing. That's his real life as well. Which obviously we all know that in pro wrestling, when your real life and your story go together, that just makes it a little bit more powerful. But what I was getting to was the little storytelling things, the little bits. When he came into the ring, he kissed the mat. Just a brief second that you could have missed. But just expressing just how grateful and happy he was to be back and able to finish his career in a way that he can choose, and that's something you hear a lot from guys like him and Sting that left not on their own terms, and they want the opportunity to leave on their own terms now. Now,
that's a great point.
To cycle it back a little bit to what you'd said originally about the stats of the match and the flow of the match and what that supports about his character. I think that your theory is a possibility. It's certainly possible that they're going to go through with telling a story of an aging athlete who has to realize his limitations. But I don't really think that that's what the story that they were trying to tell. It's true that Kazarian got more offense than Christian. Christian was fighting from underneath as you normally do as the good guy. Right. It was a respect match. They're both technically good guys, but Christian is making his big return.
Yeah.
Says that, hey, I'm aimed at the title, and Kazarian is acting as the spoiler, or at least the challenge. Can you really? So he's in a more of a heel role. So it's not surprising that he gets a bit more offense, and it was only a bit more. If you look at the stats, it's only a couple percent. And I think that the story was not one of Christian didn't have the energy, but of this is the typical babyface story of it was a classic flow of offense of the hot babyface, not maybe as hot as some because he's a more cerebral wrestler. He wasn't going at a huge fast pace, but he's controlling it first because he's come out with his plan. He's going to do what he's going to do. And then the person in the heel role, the Kazarian, takes over and he absorbs punishment for a while. And then he comes back. And he comes back because the person in the heel role, they can punish them all they want, but they can't put them away. He hit 2 of his finishers Well, he hit a classic finisher from when they had feuded before back in TNA, and then he also applied a submission that I think is going to be a finisher for him, but was not able to put him away with either of those. Yeah. And that's, I think, the focus of what they're saying is that this is someone who can endure, who's going to work hard, who can endure and come out on top, and that's the story. He can outwork everyone, just like he said he could, and that's probably the story that they're going to tell, I think. But the one that you suggested would also be very interesting, or possibly something to do after he reaches the world title level, because it's not like I think that he's going to actually take it from Kenny.
Yeah, I kind of prefer your story a little bit. I've heard some people take his slogan, outwork everyone. They kind of take that literally. Like they take work to mean the way that we mean work, as in like a worked wrestling match. But I don't think that's what it means. I think when Christian says outwork everyone, what he means is in the world of kayfabe, he's going to be in the gym longer than everyone. He's going to be, in the training room longer than everyone. He's going to be, first to show up, last to leave type of deal. And he's going to do that because, as you said, he wants to go out on his own terms right now, and he didn't believe he was going to get that opportunity. And so now that opportunity has been presented to him, he's going to make the most of it. And it's a character that I did not expect when he first showed up in AEW, but it's a very welcome surprise to me that it feels like it's going in this kind of general direction. Well, another week, another Pro Wrestling Musings podcast in the books. Anthony and Sergi, thank you so much for coming on this week, talking AEW and talking a little Forbidden Door matter between Stone Cold and Jericho. So, Sergi, where can the people find you?
Just Pro Wrestling Musings. I have the Styles Make Fights column that I put out every week.
That's right, and I wanted to talk about that. We didn't have the time today, but next time you're on, we will talk about Styles Make Fights. It's one of my favorite things to read on the website week after week. Anthony, where can the people find you, my friend?
Pro Wrestling Musings when for my couple of articles, mainly on Twitter. I live on social media, apparently. The current next article I'm doing at the moment is a look back on all the stats of total amount of matches and match time and title changes for WrestleMania in its entirety of its history. So I'm currently up to WrestleMania 8. And then I realized, there's a lot of WrestleManias and a lot of matches and WrestleMania. So I'm hoping
maybe put it out in blocks of 10.
Yeah. I'm trying to get it all done before WrestleMania, but it's WrestleMania is like right around the corner, so gotta have to move fast. So don't know if that's gonna be out by WrestleMania, but I'm hoping to.
All right. Well,
that sounds really fascinating, Anthony.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope to see that, whether it's before or after WrestleMania. I think it's always going to be an interesting look. So I hope that gets done soon. I am GA Sports. You can go find me over on YouTube at General Admission Wrestling. And while you're there, go check out Pro Wrestling Musings' YouTube channel. We got some fun stuff talking about Cody Rhodes. We got a video coming up soon talking about Ty Conti and why she has burst onto the scene the way she has over the last couple of months. And, of course,
another thing we didn't have time to talk about today.
That's, exactly. And I wish we had, because I really liked that match as well, that tag match. But Ty Conti, I think, is going to be around for a long time, so we'll have other podcasts where we can talk about her and hopefully her challenge of the world champion at some point soon. So go check us out over there and subscribe. And if you're already there watching this podcast, then thanks for being here. We appreciate it. And we appreciate you all for listening to us either on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you may be listening to this show. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. We appreciate you.